The future of WoW classes is looking to be the best we ever had, and that's because Paladin set the bar high with how Retribution is. Talents are well designed, rotation is smooth, playstyle is fun. Rogue and Demon Hunter are next in 10.2, but not all is right with the rest of the classes. Blizzard just made Retribution and by extension Paladin a really well designed class, and that's not a bad thing, of course. It actually means that WoW is at a crossroads when it comes to class design and seeing a new dawn of the best classes and specs WoW ever had. I will have to use good and bad examples to point this out, so it may come off as a critique of the devs, but I actually think this is all a learning process for them as well, which, you know, could probably be accelerated if they played the game more. I don't know, I'm just saying. But Retribution and soon the 10.2 Rogue as a whole as well are their best work so far, because they are taking what we love about our specs, the fact that as a Paladin you can bless your allies, pump some damage and take less damage without having to choose between those. And yeah, that's the issue a lot of classes are having with the new dragonflight system as an upgrade to the obviously inferior Mists of Pandaria to Shadowlands Excel spreadsheet talent system. And issues that have been corrected are probably best underlined in the class tree. Currently Retribution, and I will use this as the Paladin example since I believe as a design it has been executed way better than Protection and Holy at this time at least, has only 6 DPS nodes that are actually optional. And what do I mean by that? A lot of classes are plagued by the issue of I want to take that talent, but I cannot because it's making me choose between it and doing more damage. Unfortunately, WoW is a game that rewards DPS more than anything. And to clarify what I mean, you can think of raid encounters that have an enrage timer, aka when the boss becomes Thanos if you take it too long to kill it. That can either be in the form of something like the boss does 500% more damage and attacks 5 times faster, or the boss just starts a cast that kills the entire raid no matter what, or the room becomes filled with lava and there's nowhere to go. Essentially, mechanics that make it so you have to end the encounter before said moment culminates. An even better example of this is Mythic Plus that literally has a timer, forcing you to finish it before it reaches that end timer. And how do you resolve all of these issues? By doing more damage. That's why healers have to deal damage. That's why people prefer tanks that can deal more damage, more so than how tanky they are. And yes, this happened a bunch of times in the past, and we can have a video on it if this one gets something like 1000 likes that will tell us you are interested in having that discussion. But Red does only have 6 optional DPS nodes, not counting the non-optional ones, which are the capstones and the ones leading into them, since there isn't utility or defensives or anything else on that level that you can pick outside just these nodes. And since only 6 are optional, you can take all of them and still have about 14 more points to spend on a lot of the talents that give you blessings, mobility, and utility of any kind. So much so that if you really want stuff like Blinding Light, you can get it. While the actual spec tree is a good example of different playstyle fantasies with radiant damage and holy strike damage, big AoE cleaves, or amazing single target nukes. And that surface level design making the talents be really good, but you can even go deeper and you will see a greater option with Crusader Strikes, a talent that replaces Crusader Strike and bakes it into your auto attacks, something we have seen before. It not only removes a realistically boring ability to press from your bars, but also makes it more engaging for new players to not have to worry about an extra button. And what's even cooler than that, it actually enables a new set of stats that you would ideally want to get, making gearing more interesting, where there will be more choices to be made on what to wear, but also moderate impacts on your rotation, since you will want more haste, meaning faster swings, faster cooldowns, and generally more flashy fun. One amazing thing that cannot be taken for granted is the fact that AoE is baseline-ish, in the sense that you cannot progress through the tree without taking Divine Storm. You might build your red for Giga Boss damage and take all of the cool single target talents, but you will still have a way to deal some AoE damage on fights like Sarkreth, where other specs like Subtlety has to intentionally talent into Black Powder, which for some of its good boss damage builds does not want, but you still want the ads to die, even if you are playing subtlety, and it feels shitty to know your class has AoE abilities, but taking them makes you less impactful on the actual fight. Not a nice feeling, I gotta say. And of course, a little caveat, this is not the case in 10.2 with subtlety, which even makes this point even better, since it actually gets black powder baseline, which is the whole idea of, you know, not having to choose AoE, but actually having it baseline-ish, which we are going to get to in a minute. At the risk of making this video look like a Retribution rework review, I will mention the playstyle and fantasy, which are elements that every player interacts with, and something people who might not care that much about damage and performance certainly care about when it comes to these two. The playstyle has finally made its rotation right. With the aforementioned Crusader strikes and everything else changed for the class, there doesn't seem to be any bloat or mindless spamming of abilities. There are no actual useless skills that you press because there's nothing else to do at the given time, and effectively all abilities are impactful and visually flashy, making them very satisfying to press, more than I can say for other classes, which we will get to in a second. At the same time, the fantasy of being a holy crusader dispensing justice and retribution is there. You have the tools as a paladin to feel like a paladin, from the blessings and auras to assist your allies, to the tankiness of a melee plate warrior that charges into battle with infused power of the light. The addition of a battle resurrect ability to raise fallen allies while in combat makes sense for paladin as a concept, which was a part of this class all the way back in Warcraft 3, where Arthas and the paladin hero unit had the ability to bring multiple allies back to life. After many years, the retribution aura is finally cool and impactful and hilarious when it procs when your friends die. Okay, not cool when your friends die, but if they do, you get infused with avenging wrath, proccing your wings and dealing damage to avenge them, since that's what you signed up to do when you picked this class. Why is all of this important? Because this is a part of an RPG that we have been missing for a very long time, likely ever since Warlords of Draenor, when all of the classes were more or less homogenized to have kicks and stuns and burst cooldowns and feel more of the same than different. And that's not what made WoW good for a lot of players, part of the reason why so many people do not hesitate to praise Classic. Now, let's get to the dirty part of this video as well. The purpose of this section ideally is to point out the good by contrasting with the bad, in the hopes of bringing to light the issues some specs have, with the obvious implications that the solutions to these issues already exist. The case study here is Warrior, which is suffering from the issues Red had but eventually got fixed. In its class tree, there are 13 optional DPS nodes, not counting capstones and the talents leading up to them. That's double the amount that Red has. This unfortunately means there are fewer choices for you as a warrior to pick iconic warrior abilities that you previously had by default. I cannot tell you how many times I was playing warrior and was hitting my intimidation button only to realize I was not spec'd into it because my DPS build could not afford to spare that talent point. Sure, my group could really do without the AoE fear, but I was a warrior. I played a warrior for 17 years and I could always AoE fear, but not this time. I felt incomplete. I felt like I wasn't a warrior anymore, and instead just a cheap knockoff. And although not having it felt bad, you could make the argument that I could pick it if I am willing to give up damage. And let's say I would be willing to do that very thing. That wouldn't be the only thing missing. Intervene, Berserker Rage, Shockwave if I'm tanking, and so on. Too many things that made me a warrior are now things I have to sacrifice so I can perform up to modern WoW's standards. And that clearly can change by using Retribution's example. Feeling like less of a warrior for any reason is not cool. It's not fun. I understand that meaningful choices can create unique experiences, but Dragonflight proves so far that that trade-off is not worth it. In terms of the spec tree, a good example to contrast Retribution with is likely the entire Hunter class, but I will try to limit it to Beast Mastery and Survival at this point. Currently, when it comes to both of these specs, there are too many single target nodes for an optimized single target performance, which end up leaving no room to take abilities like Multi-Shot and Beast Cleave, or Carve/Butchery, so you can have some baseline AoE the way Red automatically takes Divine Storm. Similar to Warrior, it's hard for me to feel like a hunter when I cannot hit a second target no matter the reason, excuse, or design behind it. A BM hunter has multi-shot. A survival hunter can swing its spear from left to right to carve or butcher the enemy. It's stupid to have the talent into them in the first place, but if it must be so, make it the way Red does it, so they are automatically taken and only further optimized by talents down the road. And I'm not going to even go deeper into topics like multi-shot makes no sense without Beast Cleave, and you will never want it alone since it does close to nothing, meaning that the AoE ability for Beast Mastery needs 3 points, one of them being for the actual multi-shot spell, 2 for the Beast Cleave. As a BM hunter, it feels like I'm cheated out of a part of the spec that made Beast Mastery what it is. Again, not a feeling that a hunter player should feel under any circumstances. There is no justification that I, as a hunter player, will accept from the dev that decided this is a good thing, taking something I had all the time and telling me I have to make an active sacrifice now to have what I always did. Beast Mastery has about 9 to 10 pure dead talents, which mean talents you never picked or picked at all in Dragonflight period. That should be a clear indication that the spec needs work. Well, the class needs work, because when you go to survival, you'll see that it's actually the owner of the 8 most boring talent nodes in the game. One of them being Ferocity, which gives you a mediocre % damage increase done by your pet, Energetic Ally, which gives bonus maximum resource, which granted Warrior has this, but it's at least in the class tree, making it feel less bad, Improved Wildfire Bomb, which is turbo mediocre % damage increase to bombs, buffed in 10.2 to be slightly less turbo mediocre for 2 points, Sharp Edges, which is 4% crit for 2 points, Spear Focus % damage increase to Mongoose Bite for 2 points, Sweeping Spear, mediocre % damage increase to Mongoose and Butchery or their counterparts for 2 points, Tactical Advantage, % damage for 2 points, Killer Companion, % damage increase to Kill Command for 2 points on the same row as Coordinated Assault, an actual DPS cooldown. Imagine putting these 8 talents in the red talent tree instead of 8 random ones that it currently has, and see what the perspectives of the player base would be. All of this while Aspect of the Eagle, the coolest fantasy for survival that gave it range, is a dead talent that you will never pick because you just cannot spare the point for it. Talking about playstyle has to be exemplified with Frost Death Knight. The general playstyle is the same as the last patch, and the one before that, and the 3 in the past expansion, and the 3 in the expansion before that, while Retribution, although it kept the core identity of it, it elevated to a modern version, even if it's still one of the simplest and easiest to pull off, something Red always had in common with Frost DK. One thing that Red has fixed, which still plagues Frost Death Knight and the whole Death Knight class while we're at it, is the over-reliance on ground effects like Death and Decay. This makes the spec feel old and left behind by the times, especially when Red gets Consecrated Blade to bake Consecration into a baseline ability and remove the actual spell from its bars. I'm not advocating for this to be the DK solution, but a solution has been found for a very similar problem. Surely there are more out there. There's also the emphasis on a playstyle that forces you to stay glued to your target or suffer major DPS loss and a wait time of 2 minutes with Breath of Sindragosa, while Red has its execution sentence, similar playstyle, with a cap duration of 8 seconds that can be prolonged as a choice, and a wait time or cooldown of 30 seconds. Not even close to being the same thing. The more abstract aspect of playing a class, the fantasy, which I touched upon briefly before, is lacking in classes like Hunter and Warrior. Survival in particular is the most ironic spec to showcase how much Hunter lacks survivability, so much so that it became a meme, and for this we can do a 1-by-1 comparison with Retribution, especially when it comes to their defensive cooldowns, which are very lackluster. Take Turtle versus Bobble for instance, with the winner being Bobble or Divine Shield. Turtle is a 2.4 minute cooldown that deflects attacks and gives 30% damage reduction for 8 seconds for an additional 2 talent points investment, while Bobble is a 3.5 minute full immune, cleanse, and movement impairing immunity for 8 seconds for a single point cost. Survival of the fittest versus divine protection is another one, with the winner being, as you guessed it, divine protection, clearly. Why? Well, survival of the fittest needs 1 talent point for the actual ability and 3 to either make it a 2.4 minute cooldown with 40% damage reduction for 6 seconds, or a 2-minute cooldown with 20% damage reduction for 8 seconds, all while divine protection is baseline and needs 2 more points to make it a 1-minute cooldown with 30% damage reduction for 8 seconds. We can do this for exhilaration and lay on hands, but I think you get my point now. And I mentioned this before, but the lack of baseline flavor abilities that made the specs what they are feel like you are playing an incomplete class. And I'm not talking about big cooldown capstones here, but abilities such as Aspect of the Eagle, Intervene, Intimidating Shout, Steel Trap, which this is actually a capstone by the way. You don't feel this way with Retribution because it has a talent into Blessings, sure, but it has fewer DPS nodes, and the Blessings are central on a row with no other DPS nodes, making them accessible all the time. We have seen too many videos of how Dragonflight is missing the mark lately. Hell, we even made a couple of them ourselves. But we always like to take the time to point out the good that can actually be done and is done in the game. All of this is but one of the multiple examples of how WoW is actually on the brink of becoming more fun and amazingly designed by having specs like Ret. Classes such as Rogue and Demon Hunters, who are, of course, not without their faults, but examples of the first steps taken into a modern direction when it comes to class design that at the very least can spark the flame of old mains coming back to the game to play the classes they fell in love with. Hope is already taking shape in the form of the Rogue and the Demon Hunter reworks, videos you can watch on our channel, and we recommend starting with the Assassination one right here.